We need to sustain the fact that the majority of humans do not want to kill another human. And I'm talking about Australian soldiers, U.S. Marines, all of us. And so why is it that we go to war and we do kill and we have to put in that situation? It's because we have aligned ourselves and taken an oath to a higher purpose. We believe it is a higher purpose. So we took an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And as part of that, we were sent by our nation to wherever to do violence. But we can come back to this moral clarity. So if we can't create moral clarity for the artificial intelligence, then we're done.
Welcome to the AI Grapple podcast. My name is Kate vanderVoort, founder and CEO of Social Mediology and the AI Success Lab. Today, we're diving into one of the most critical conversations of our time, the role of AI in military decision-making and the ethical questions it raises. My guest is Jason West, a former US Marine Corps officer who retired as a lieutenant colonel after more than a decade of service. With first-hand experience participating in AI-driven war simulations and understanding how autonomous systems could be used in modern warfare, Jason brings a unique perspective to the conversation. Now the founder of Officers Eat Last and author of Leadership Development, a blueprint for building your leadership foundation, Jason helps business leaders navigate ethical decision-making and responsible leadership. Lessons drawn from both the battlefield and the boardroom. From the risks of AI making life and death decisions to how businesses can use AI responsibly, this conversation is one you will not want to miss. Welcome, Jason. It is so great to have you here today.
It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the invite.
So listen, you're the founder of Officers Eat Last and the author of Leadership Development, a blueprint for building your leadership foundation. Can you share a bit about your professional journey and what led you to focus on leadership and particularly around ethical decision making? And then we'll jump into the AI stuff.
Sure. So I think for me is my professional journey. I've essentially had two career hats on since I became an adult. Like a lot of kids, when I graduated high school, I went right into college and I was trying to get a degree in finance. And so that was kind of the beginning of an adult journey to be in finance, work in a financial institution, that type of thing. But while I going through my freshman year into my sophomore year, like a lot of young people, I started kind of doing some soul searching on service. My father had been in the military, U.S. military. My grandfathers had been in the U.S. military, World War I and World War II. And I was just asking myself, well, how does the timing work? Like, will I serve? What, if I did, what would it look like? And so that led to some soul searching. And the U.S. Marine Corps, I don't know how much you know about it, but they're very big into we're tough, we're mean, all these things. And when I was a young person, I really kind of bought into that. So I was like, well, if I'm going to join the service, that's the one I want to join. So I ended up leaving college after my sophomore year. I joined the U.S. Marines, which is essentially set the next career professional hat in place for me. But I joined the reserves. So I came back to college and essentially was a college student in the Marine Corps Reserves. And this was in the 90s when, fortunately, the United States and the rest of the world, we weren't at war with everybody. And so my commitment for active service was over even before I graduated from college. And I was like, okay, well, that chapter is done. And I went to work for a bank in New Orleans, Louisiana. And I'm in this bank and I'm working in there and I'm doing all the stuff that young people do that when they're in finance and they're an analyst and all this. But I felt this pull again. I just felt like I don't want to be on the 32nd floor in an office building in New Orleans when I'm a young person. And so I had this pull back to the Marine Corps. So I put my application in. I go and become a Marine Corps officer, which it's basically like, I took a business hat on and then I put this Marine hat back on. And then I fully intended to get out after my first tour, but as things unfolded, I ended up doing a second tour, and then I ended up doing a third tour. And next thing you know, I had been a Marine officer for 10 years. So I finally did take the hat off again. And I don't know how much you know about active duty and reserves and everything else, but I resigned my active duty commission, became a reserve officer, and then I went back into the private sector. And I was in a number of roles in sales. I started a company, but I continued my service as a reserve officer, and then eventually ended up retiring in 2018 as a lieutenant colonel. So those are kind of, I just, to characterize my professional career, I just feel like it's by these two hats that I've worn. And I know some of the things that we're going to get into, there'll be a discussion about what is my leadership foundation? Where does it come from? And I say it very much comes from my time in service. And what I've tried to do in the private sector is blend some of those best practices that Marines try to use and operate with. But in the private sector, obviously, you shouldn't just tell everybody that works for you, just act like a Marine and everything will be great, because people don't want to hear that. So you have to have a blended approach in terms of how you create success in the private sector. So, anyways, that's a little bit about my journey, and then how the artificial intelligence plays in is obviously there's tons of ways to blend artificial intelligence in the private sector to enhance team performance, to enhance the performance of a business. And then on the military side, is there some scary ways to blend artificial intelligence that I'm sure we'll get into during the podcast.
Yeah, wow, what an interesting weaving, I guess, of two incredibly diverse career
Yeah.
career trajectories. Explain to me Officers Eat Last, and in Australia, the military is not, it's culturally, it's just a little bit different, I think, to the US. So maybe some of our audience, there might be a reference in there that we don't necessarily get here. But where does Officers Eat Last come from?
So it comes from my time as a Marine officer. And so we say officers eat last, but we also live that out. So whenever we're leading a unit, so a company commander, a battalion commander, regimental commander, and we are out in the field or we're in certain combat environments, is whenever there's a meal provided, is the Marines are directed to line up lowest rank, and then the highest ranking individuals eat last. And so it's basically a symbol like of servant leadership. So it's a physical expression of servant leadership. So officers eat last is essentially, that's the reason I called my company that. Is I didn't necessarily want to call it servant leadership. So, let me have a cool little branding name as I move forward. And since I actually was a Marine officer, I try to live that out. And it depends on who I'm working with on the business owner side. Some people are all about it. They're like, yes, that's the kind of company I want. And other people, they're not as into it. And it really depends on the business owner that you're working with. If they're more focused on profitability for their own purposes and for their own sake, or are they driven by a higher purpose in service to their customers and their employees and all of their key stakeholders? So as you might imagine, from a client standpoint, I'm going to align more with a business owner that recognizes service in service to others, than someone who is like, tell me how to make more money, and then and that'd be the end of the conversation. I don't necessarily, I'm not saying that I wouldn't take certain individuals on as clients, but if that was all it was every single time, I'm not going to be the right consultant for those types of individuals.
And had AI come onto the scene while you were still in the military? Did you have any engagement with that while you were still in service, or has that been more since you've left?
No, I would say it has, from this perspective is, and you may have already heard some of these terms, but the U.S. military, we kind of talk about in decision making, should a human be in the loop of whatever the decision is, or should a human be on the loop or out of the loop? And is that something that is in your vernacular for artificial intelligence?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we talk about that in a business context all the time.
Okay, great. Yeah. So from a warfare perspective, especially over the last 20 plus years, whether it's good or bad, is when we are going after the enemy, we basically work off of a high payoff target list. And so we're constantly, from an intelligence standpoint, trying to figure out who the worst guys are and what methods that we can use to impact them, which may be kill them, it may be capture them, detain them, or whatever. And so you can get into a situation where you're using sensors and all kind of other things in order to try to find these individuals. And the scary piece, which I'm not going to say has been done yet, because I'm not going to get into classified information or any of that stuff. But the scary piece is obviously you can have tons of sensors, and as we move forward, this is the scary piece, at least to me, is if you're working off a high payoff target list, you literally could have artificial intelligence say, I found the individual, and then it could queue an asset, and then it could send a missile and kill the person right there. So to me, like, that's the scary piece of where we're headed is, how do we train artificial intelligence to have morals and ethics and things of that nature? Because if you release it, if you feed in, you say, these are the 200 worst guys. We're in whatever country. And, if you find them, then you can kill them. I mean, unfortunately, through facial recognition and all the rest of the stuff like that, that is reality. Like, that actually could happen.
And there's so much about that. So I remember in my very early days of investigating AI and some of the moral and ethical dilemmas, I remember reading an article about autonomous drones being used in Ukraine. Um, and there was a company called, it was either Saker or Seeker. And one of the things that struck me, so they were building these autonomous drones and the Ukraine are using them. I believe that they are armed, or maybe they're just for gathering intelligence. But one of the things that struck me is the founders of that company 3 years prior had been running a digital marketing agency. And I kind of thought, wow, this really is the days of the wild, wild west, in that you've got someone who one day is running a digital marketing agency and the next day they're creating autonomous AI powered
Yeah. Yeah.
drones. What could possibly go wrong in that equation?
Yeah.
And that's why I was particularly interested in having this conversation with you, because there are so many elements of our life that are going to be touched by AI, probably every element of our life. And unfortunately, in the climate that we're in, warfare is something that may be, we may be dealing with in different ways, either locally or globally. When it comes to the ethics of that, because on the flip side, sorry, there is a question coming, but on the flip side, I've also read around how AI can make decisions in the kind of situations that you're talking about that actually minimize risk to civilians, for example, so that if it's deployed properly, that it can actually make decisions that humans can't make at a much finer, more analytical perspective. So how do you balance that? And what do you say about, how do you weigh those pros and cons? Because maybe there's less casualties in using AI
Yeah.
than
Yeah.
than with humans making that decision.
No, that's a great point. Um, so to me, I would say one of the examples would be ballistic missiles. And the reason, at least to me, for me, the example is ballistic missiles is the speed that a missile can travel. So you're in a situation where you're going to have to integrate some sensors and other things in order to make a decision, and you're not going to be able to have a human in the loop on those types of things, because if you had a peer competitor, and we won't name the peer competitor that is a threat to Australia, and they are also a threat to the United States and many countries around the world. But if you had this peer competitor launching many of these missiles, is their speed is so fast, is if it hit anywhere around you, you won't even hear the missile. Like, so you cannot make a decision. Even if you had a little button, you're like, I'm going to press this button and it's going to shoot this missile out of the sky. Well, the missile's moving so fast, you can't hit the button. You're just going to be floating up to heaven, and that's going to be the end of it. So in those situations is we need ground-based air defense and other things, and they need to make these decisions immediately in order to protect us. And like you said, I think also we can take that out. It would also protect civilians. It would protect infrastructure, civilians, and things of that nature. And then when we get it, so that would be kind of like a first order effect. And then when we get into the second and third order effect, is like, okay, what is our counter to whatever this is taking place? So again, without getting into classified information, there's many Western military ships have very unique technologies on them. And obviously there are many locations around the globe that have very unique technologies on them where there is no human in the loop. So I would say the balance for the U.S. military, Australian military, and kind of Western militaries and our governments and things of that nature is how do we stack various technologies that we're making a conscious decision and saying a human will not be in the loop, because a human cannot make a decision fast enough. And we need to protect civilians. We need to protect the soldiers, the Marines, and those types of things. So those are all complex things. And I would say that they are active discussions. They're active discussions right now on how to do that. So that the ones on the defense, because that's what we're talking about. We're talking about, I'm painting a scenario where we're under attack. And so we are executing defensive measures in order to protect ourselves, protect civilians, soldiers, Marines, the whole thing. When we get onto the offensive side, I think unfortunately is the reason the West needs to do the research. They need to do tests of experimentation and everything else, because we need to be ahead of the peer competitor. And that's my take, is we need to understand the offensive actions and how these things are used, because once you do that, then that's the best ways to create defensive countermeasures to those offensive actions. Unfortunately, this whole thing is kind of like Pandora's box. It's gonna open up, and it's gonna be a huge mess, I think, unfortunately.
Well, and I can see a world where I was having this conversation with the CEO of a large finance company here around using AI to fight AI scammers and AI cybersecurity threats. And I can see in what you're saying that it'll end up being, who can AI out the other in terms of intelligence.
Yes, unfortunately, yes. So have you ever heard of a gentleman? His name is David Kilcullen. Does that name ring a bell? So you can Google him. He's a famous Australian. If you know anything
Google anymore. I go
to
you
can chat GPT him then. You can open AI him or whatever. But he is well known, at least with Western militaries. Australian. He was an Australian officer. He's written a lot of books, counterinsurgency guy, all kind of stuff. And I hope he would allow me to say he's a friend of mine. We've been at a couple different conferences together, but the one that is relevant that my mind was on this when we started talking about you invited me to be a guest is a number of years ago. I had the opportunity to be in a war game with David Kilcullen, and there were actually Australian soldiers involved in this war game. And we were the design of it was the United States, and the U.S. Marines were heavily involved in this, and Australian forces and some other coalition forces against a peer competitor, which we're not going to name who the peer competitor was, but there was a peer competitor. And what the design of the war game is we had leaped into the future into 2035. And this war game was at least 3 or 4 years ago. So we leaped into the future into 2035. And what we did is, and his guys actually did a lot of the prep work, but we basically created weapons and everything else. And many of these were just ideas. So in say, again, I can't remember if it was 2022 or 2023, but it's probably 2022, is we created a card with a weapon that had not been produced. Nothing had been created, but somebody had thought it up. And they're like, I think we can do this. It may take us 5 years to do this. So we did all of this. And then what we did is we gave each side a big, huge list of weapons and forces and everything else. And then how we had this set is myself and some other retired Marines. We played U.S. Marines. We played U.S. Marine forces. The Australians were obviously playing themselves. And then we had individuals who were experts on the peer competitor, like their capabilities, all of this. And so the way a war game works is you kind of set a scenario and then you say, okay, here's the scenario. This is where we are. This is where we're in the world. Okay, each side go away and create whatever your course of action is. And then when we come back, we set all the pieces and all that, and then you clash them together. And so the reason I find this interesting for this conversation and what we're doing on the podcast is what would play out is each side, so our side and their side, we would put all of the robots and all of these really, really unique capabilities, and they would fight each other. And we kept all of the humans back. And so I think, fortunately or unfortunately, as more types of technologies get created, I feel like that's what the humans will do. And it's what's fascinating about that is World War I, if you've ever studied it, it was very much attrition warfare, but humans had to collide. Humans were constantly colliding, and then they were digging in and that type of thing. So it's almost kind of like, and I pray we don't go back to war and we don't have any kind of, peer competitor thing like this. But unfortunately, if we did, what it's looking like right now is robots. And it's almost going to be like attrition. And then each side will clearly and unfortunately be trying to get to the humans that are actually making the decisions with the thought process. If we can get rid of the humans that are driving these actions, then we will win.
So, it is like a science fiction
novel. I know.
It really is. And I'm fascinated at the term peer competitor and how you've shifted, not you personally, but how we have shifted from the enemy to peer competitor. Nice. I think the unnamed peer competitor was found in our waters this week, unbeknownst to our government.
Probably. Well, the reason that is used in Western militaries and mindset wise is that when the United States was running down Al Qaeda, and when the United States was clashing with the Taliban, and when the United States was clashing with insurgents and things of that nature in Iraq, and they're not peers. Like, yes, Al Qaeda created a lot of damage, a lot of violence, that all of these things have created a lot of fear, but they did not have a state. They did not have a nation state behind them. They couldn't compete at the level. Yes, they created casualties, but unfortunately, in the big scheme of things, they could not. They didn't overwhelm Western countries. Whereas the reason this term peer competitor is used is this competitor is at a level where it would not be good. It would be more aligned with Germany against the Europeans, that type of thing. And so it's a level of respect from respecting who we're in competition with is what it's about. And we need to outcycle them from technology and development and those types of things in order to maintain deterrence. And basically, from an overmatch standpoint.
Yeah, it's really interesting because for someone like myself, I'm here in Australia and I have up until, 2 years ago, I've got a broad geopolitical interest and knowledge about kind of key players and what the potential things that might play out globally. But AI I now have this deep fascination with the with the geopolitics of the AI race. And,
Sure.
you see things like DeepSeek, and everyone's talking about DeepSeek, but it's not just DeepSeek. There's QuenChat and Kimi and all these Chinese AI platforms that have just suddenly, there was almost this narrative that China was behind and we've stopped sending them the chips. And so they don't have access to the same technology that we do. And that just doesn't appear to be the case. I mean, that could be a whole nother podcast because there's a whole lot in maybe how they're training their models and whether they're actually using US technology to do that. But it's really brought some of these issues to the fore in ways that I think there's a lot more clarity for people about just what that relationship or dynamic looks like globally.
Yeah. No, exactly. I completely agree. And going back to your example you were talking about with Ukraine and the drones. Now, I don't know the specific company, but you probably know that there were many companies in Ukraine that had customers all over the globe. They had contracts all over the globe and things of that nature. So I wouldn't be surprised if the company you're speaking of was located in Ukraine. Now I don't know that, but what has happened is many of those companies shifted their focus from digital marketing and some of these other things to we are in a fight for survival as a country, and so they aligned their capability set, their intelligence, everything else to contributing to defending against the Russians.
That makes a lot of sense. I hadn't thought about it from that. Yeah, from that perspective, that does make a lot more sense. It struck me as a little odd at the time, but that makes in that context.
And again, I'm making an assumption, and sometimes when we make assumptions, that's not a good thing to do. But many of the companies in Ukraine definitely shifted their focus to what can they do to protect the sovereignty of Ukraine. So complex problem.
Yes. And I often say that I think, if we lean into this technology, into AI in a human-centered, responsible, ethical way, we have the opportunity to solve some of the world's greatest problems. But equally, it's humans that's using this technology, and we also have the potential to create some fairly large problems. So we've been talking about AI can process data at speeds that no human could ever possibly match, but it does lack moral judgment. So in your experience, and maybe using this as a bridge from the military into business, what are the risks when we remove that human element from those high stake decisions, whether they're in military or business? What are some of those risks and how might we address those?
No, that's a wonderful question. So because of my two hats, I spent a period of time working for a company, Groupon. I don't know if they got over to Australia. Okay.
Oh, yeah. I had to ban myself from Groupon.
Okay. So, interesting enough is I did not, so I worked for Groupon, but I did not work on the coupon side. Groupon made money and was able to go public and all the rest of the stuff on the coupon. And then somebody, I don't remember how all the years map out, but somebody said, hey, we've got all these customers, we got all this stuff. Why don't we sell them physical products? And so that happened at whatever year. And then I went to work for them in 2014 because I had previously started a company in logistics and I was moving military equipment for the military, like as a private company, this type of thing. And I ended up selling that company. And then the way Marines get jobs all the time is a buddy of mine was working for Groupon and he's like, hey, man, why don't you come work for me? We're selling all these products. But the reason I say all that is because this is the blend of artificial intelligence. So we're in e-commerce, right? This umbrella of e-commerce. And as we know, Amazon is essentially the big, massive gorilla in e-commerce. And so Groupon was competing with them just like everybody else. Anybody else that's selling things online and trying to fulfill those things. And so we had our fulfillment center, and on any given day, we had about 500 people in there. And one of the positions is it's like a packing station. So you have all these conveyors and everything else, but you have a human standing there. And when you invited me on this podcast, this is another thing I was thinking about, like, where's artificial intelligence going, all this. So what we've done in the past is we had a human and we have all these boxes and these packages and everything else. And we have all of these random things that are being sold. So all we have to do is give the human a small amount of training and they can make decisions very quickly. So if a mouse, you're selling like a little computer mouse, they just look and they pick a box, they put it in there, put some tape on it, boom. And then the next thing is a toothbrush, boom. We don't have to write any code. We just have a human standing there, like that's it. So what has been happening over the last 10 years, which I'm sure you already know, is it depends on the company, but many companies, these people, like their jobs are already, they're gone because what's been happening is obviously the integration of robots and the integration of the artificial intelligence to be intelligent enough to be like, that's a mouse pad. I need this type of box. I'm going to take the robot arm, put it in there. And then the next thing is a toothbrush. The next thing is a blender. The next thing is a set of towels. And they're basically, eventually, obviously, they're way faster than a human ever was. And so I think the challenges for us is, yes, we've just gotten rid of human labor because obviously the human, they had to be fired or whatever. But the morality and all the rest of it is, what should the company do? The company should work with whoever AI is taking these jobs, in my opinion. But the morality should be that the company should say, hey, we want to train you to do higher level tasks. Are you interested in that? We want to recertify you in these other things. So I really feel like that's the blend. Is as companies move forward, the ruthless thing to do is like, okay, all the robots are working or whatever. We used to have 500 people. Just, tell them tomorrow morning that they can't come in. They're all fired. Or can we actually do it in a healthier way and work with the 500 over a period of time? And I'm not saying every one of them are going to take it, right? But work with the 500 over a period of time to say, we would like to work with you on reskilling where would you like to reskill? And so, I mean, that's kind of my 2 cents on how do we blend this? Because what's going to happen is private companies will automate, and just to stay on this simple example, a company will automate and get rid of a human standing there for 8 to 10 hours a day, putting things in boxes and putting tape on them. They're going to get rid of them if anybody still has them. But the question for us, business leaders and the society, is it's like, okay, what are we doing to reskill these people? And that's the longer term perspective. I mean, does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. And, we only work with companies that have a human-centered, responsible, ethical approach to AI. So
Yeah.
companies that are looking to get rid of workforces do not come to us at all,
Yeah.
because that's not our approach. And I think the interesting thing, if you take that to the next step, is for those companies that actually look at their workforce, look at AI capability, and look at how they can, as you've said, empower their humans to do more, to be more, to serve their customers in more human ways, to show up in
Yeah.
places that they just haven't. I mean, I had someone yesterday say to me, so, do you only work 2 days a week because AI is saving you all this time? And I said, no, not at all. I said, I'm busier than ever,
Yeah.
but I'm able to do so much more with the help of AI than I would ever have been able to do otherwise.
Sure.
And so I think companies that take that approach where it's like, how can we use this technology to support our staff to fulfill their professional goals and to meet the needs of the company? Now, of course, a lot of companies are looking at the bottom line. They're going to look at how they can use this technology to save costs. And I think there's utopia and how it could be. And then there's the brutal side of that and how some will approach it. And I think most will find a middle ground in between. But I love that approach. And I love that, there are people like yourself who are working with leadership to really understand, because I think we all have a responsibility to bring everyone along on this journey, whatever that looks like.
Yeah, exactly. And so
Mm,
the job of standing there and putting things in boxes, I think most people would say, if that's the only job they could get, then they would say, like, okay, I'll do it, because if that's the only job I could get. But the reason we actually can have a healthy plan forward is, many people, if you said, well, what if I trained you on additional skills, like higher level skills, many people would say, well, yes, like I would love that, because there's a certain, obviously, amount of boredom and everything else with just standing there, putting things in boxes and putting tape on it. Um, and I don't want to discount the effort and the labor, but at the same time, this is another, I think, a human centered approach is, let's allow the humans to scale up to providing higher level things to people. So that would be my take, and I think that's the blend that we need as we move forward. Is, let's not just ruthlessly cut everybody because we've created a process that AI can do. Let's take a few more minutes, a few more hours, a few more days to think about what is the treatment of our labor. I mean, I really hope people will pay in the marketplace, quite frankly, for any companies that do it in a ruthless way. Is vote with your pocketbook and buy products from somebody else.
And I think, I've said this a lot on this podcast, that I think one of the things we haven't considered so much yet is consumer backlash. And if you think that large portions of our population are going to be negatively impacted by this technology, they're not going to want to buy from companies or they're not going to want to go and take jobs that are heavily working with AI, certainly not in the short term. But I interviewed Ryan Levesque on my podcast recently, and he had a really interesting take, which was, it's not just those manual labor type roles that are going to be affected. It's going to be lawyers and doctors and people at a much more senior level. And what happens when they start to lose jobs? Where's the income coming from to purchase all these products that these companies are making? And I think there's some second and third order issues that are going to arise as we move forward that it's really important that we keep talking about, because I do think we can find a way through where everybody makes it through somehow.
Yes.
But I
Well,
think
so
there's lots of
I think
different layers.
anytime, because humans, for the most part, want relationships. So anything that is centered on having humans together will sustain itself. We enjoy breaking bread with each other. We enjoy, for those of us who like to have a pint of beer or whiskey, Jack Daniels in my case. Um, so anything centered around that, anything centered around assisting with, various adventures and hiking and all of this, I think they'll sustain themselves. They'll be very healthy. I would much rather go to a restaurant and they say we have every chef back there is a human, as opposed to a restaurant and they say we only have robots back here. And
Yeah, making burgers with
yeah,
3D
exactly.
printed
Yeah,
meat.
exactly. You do this kiosk right here, and artificial intelligence figures out what you want, and the robots make us like, I'm going to the human one. Sorry. So, I mean, I'm joking around, but it's kind of like these are the things that we should be thinking about as we move forward. And I'm with you on certain tasks that physicians do, certain tasks that lawyers do. But I also feel like there's a way that so they should upskill themselves, because on the lawyer attorney side is there are some very complex legal things that I think we still need humans involved. And then obviously there are some things that where they're basically just like a little factory of, charging customers, charging customers, charging customers. So I think some of those things I can definitely see artificial intelligence essentially taking over those things, because they just have a little cottage industry of, somebody calls in, ask a specific question. They're like, yep, we'll get it back to you. And they charge them $500 and then they do it again. They do it again. They do it again. I feel like those types of things. It's like, hey, that's ending for you. You're going to have to raise your level of skill, and you're not going to be able to do the $500 transaction for a template that you have saved in Microsoft Word.
Yeah, and Chatty is pretty good at legal advice, I have to say.
Yeah.
But it does take us to another topic. But first, just on that, I often say that AI is going to break a lot of systems that are already broken. And I think healthcare, education, and the legal system, those three areas, and there are more, but those three areas in particular are due for a revamp. And I think AI is going to shake that up in a lot of ways, which I think could be a really positive thing for humanity. But I was reading the other day, and this cuts across all of the aspects of our conversation so far. They have found that the most commonly known large language platforms in playing games of chess, when they realize they're going to lose, get manipulative and they cheat. And I was reading that and just thinking, so in all of the conversations that we've had at every level, from autonomous decision making in warfare through to senior leadership decisions, through to legal advice, packing on a factory floor, I think there's this unknown that we still don't know how we're going to deal with: the hallucinations, the making stuff up, or actually just making a decision that it wasn't trained to do. What are your thoughts around how we're going to navigate that as we move forward?
That is a great question. And
You
obviously,
don't have an answer?
no, of course. Well, of course, I don't think any of us can.
No.
We can present a theory, but clearly on whoever is coding these GPTs needs to come with some moral clarity, and however we can train moral clarity into artificial intelligence. But I completely agree with you. I haven't read every single one of these articles, but I have definitely read a few of them where the artificial intelligence, I mean, I think it gets back to you have whoever is training these things is they're making it competitive. It's like, hey, give me a better answer, and they're like challenging it again. And I can just see someone writing prompts like, no, that's not good enough. And so you essentially are creating like this competitive spirit in this artificial intelligence. And what ends up happening, I mean, think of just like, I'm just my brain's on some dumb things on the human side. Is if we had humans out and we were doing a race, right? So we had like 10 teenage boys and they were racing and they're like, hey, you can do better, Billy, and you can do better, Carl, and they're racing. It's like we're just breeding all this competition, breeding all this competition, breeding all this competition. And then the artificial intelligence figures out they can't win. They keep trying to win. They can't win. They keep trying to win. They can't win. And Billy keeps winning. So artificial intelligence, because it has no moral clarity or whatever, grabs a pistol and shoots Billy in the head and then runs the race and is like down at the end celebrating. And he's so happy. It's like, no, man, don't do that. Don't do that. So how can we put some of these guardrails in place? Because fortunately, humans, and I have some personal experience with this, actually do not like killing other humans. And that is a good thing. And we need to sustain that. We need to sustain the fact that the majority of humans do not want to kill another human. And I'm talking about Australian soldiers, US Marines, all of us. And so why is it that we go to war and we do kill and we have to get put in that situation? It's because we have aligned ourselves and taken an oath to a higher purpose. We believe it is a higher purpose. So we took an oath to defend the U.S. Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And as part of that, we were sent by our nation to wherever to do violence. But we can come back to this moral clarity. So if we can't create moral clarity for the artificial intelligence, then we're done. And I mean, that's the scariest part is if we can't get this integrated in, that at the end of the day, humans, you should be serving humanity, not competing against humanity.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a very profound thought for us to start winding up on. I had so many thoughts as you were saying that, but even this morning as we're recording this, ChatGPT 4.5 has just been released literally an hour ago at the time of recording, and they're talking about it being a much more intuitive, having a much higher EQ. So it has empathy, has the ability to understand human needs and human intent. So I'll be really interested once we get off this podcast. I'm off to go test what that actually means from a marketing perspective. That's super exciting. But I think there are some other implications of that. And it reminded me as you were talking in my early days in investigating AI, there were things like I think one of the first legal cases I heard about was a man who had scaled the palace walls. The Queen was still alive, had scaled the palace walls with a crossbow in an attempt to assassinate the Queen. And his legal defense was that he was in relationship with an AI bot, and the AI bot had told him that his plan was sound. So it wasn't morally saying, yes, you should go and assassinate the Queen, but was saying, yes, if you do this, you will be able to scale the wall. So even that, just that slight moral. And one of the other ones that I was particularly interested in is that context of, say, a girl or a woman going to AI and saying, how do I please my boyfriend and what can I do to make the relationship work? And what if that's a 13-year-old girl and a 60-year-old man? Yeah. There's no sort of context there. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that morality and ethics unfolds. And I do believe, it might be naive, but I do believe that the people behind this technology largely want to see it be safe and secure and do that. So I do know that many of them are working on that quite heavily.
Well,
But
I think this definitely, so there's a part to play for governance. And I'm using that word uh, deliberately. So the governance, so the Australians elect officials, the United States, we elect officials, Canadians, on and on and on. And there's a part to play for governance. And because we cannot leave it. I don't want to pick on 25-year-old software coders and 20-year-old software coders, but maybe I will. Is we should not leave governance to them. There literally should be basically adult supervision over these structures. And I mean, I'm for balance. I'm not for censorship and all of the rest of this stuff. But if we find individuals that are deliberately coding things that, like your examples, they have no morality, they have no humanity or whatever, then we need governance structures in place to hold people accountable.
I'm not even sure, though, that they're coding them to not have morality. It's
Yeah,
potentially just that they haven't figured out how to get them to have morality.
sure.
Yeah.
What,
I
but
interviewed a 19-year-old recently whose firm belief was that us older generations worry too much. AI is going to solve all of our problems. There are infinite resources in the world. We just need to figure out how to access them. The responsibility sits with the government, and within a few years, the government will be run by AI. And so I agree. I think we need to not just have this next generation running things, because it's
yeah, well, that we can't, because more
wisdom
than
is an
likely
amazing thing.
that's a 19-year-old that hasn't seen real evil. And you don't even have to go to combat to see real evil. You can see it on city streets from time to time with people robbing people, killing people, breaking into their homes, and all of these things. And so, to me, that's a naive statement, but that's what we would expect from a 19-year-old.
Yes. Well, Jason, I feel like we could talk for days on these topics. I feel like we've only just scratched the
Yep.
surface. But I always like to end with the question of, as you stand on the hill and look out into the future, which the hill's getting smaller and smaller because we can't really see that far down the line at the moment, what are you, I guess, feeling optimistic and enthusiastic about when it comes to AI, and how that might be something practical that people can take away from today?
I like how you asked the question. That's very good. Because you wanted to get me aligned on the positive side. That's where we need to be. We need to be on the positive side. Um, I'm excited about it. I'm very excited about it. Like a friend of mine, spent the last number of years getting a master's degree in data science. And, he's a straight up data scientist. We're buddies from the Marines. So Marines can get higher education and learn and do things, like that. But the only reason I bring him up is he has not been using artificial intelligence that much. He has not been using, these tools that have been coming out. And he came, by my house, 6, 8, 9 months ago, whenever, and for a visit, and I brought him into my office, and I was like, "Hey, check this out, or whatever." And so it's like it's small things like that where the more people we pull in for awareness, I think is my vision of the next 3 to 5 years. Is we need to continue to pull more adults, more people in, and say these things and these tools are legitimate. They are straight up legitimate. In anyone's job, it has the ability to enhance your productivity. It has the ability to shrink the number of hours that you work. And what you can do with that is decide to work more, or you could just say, I'm just going to enhance my quality of life and go fishing this afternoon, or I'm going to enhance my quality of life and spend a couple more hours with my kids. So to me, the positive side that I see the next 3 to 5 years is all of us, we do not have to be software coders or any of these things. There are many different ways that it can enhance our life. It can enhance our productivity, and all of those things. So that's the way I see it on the productivity, in terms of the next 3 to 5 years.
Amazing. Thank you so much for your time today, Jason. I really appreciate it. How can people best find you? We'll include all your links in the show notes,
Sure.
but where would you like people to head to find you?
So they can go to my website, officerseatlast.com. They can find me on LinkedIn if they're into that thing. And I have a YouTube channel as well. So any of those places.
Excellent. We will definitely include those links in the show notes. Thank you so much for your time today.
Great being here. Thank you so much.
Thank you for tuning in to the AI Grapple. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and subscribe on your favourite podcast platform. We would love to hear your thoughts, so reach out with any questions or comments about the show. Until next time, keep grappling with AI and stay curious.